Hey guys, this is John Bailey of JB Woodcrafts in the fifth and final part on how to turn a wooden bowl on a traditional pole lathe. In this final clip, I'll be hollowing out the bowl and making the final cuts. If you've liked this series, don't forget to subscribe and comment and share my videos. Thank you for watching. Welcome back. This is data of my bowl turning. We have continued this today. Now we have the light back for filming because this could quite easily have been finished yesterday. So I'm happy with the way the outside is. So we now need to turn the bowl over so we can start hollowing out.
I thought people would make the finger spinning around with things.
Right, so everything is now secure, the wedges are back in place and the bowl is in the right angle so that I can start hollowing out. And we move the tool rest up so that it can support the tool and not move around when I start working on the hollowing out. So I'm using the outside bevel hook tool just to start hollowing this out. So I start in the centre. And the idea of starting in the centre is so that you create a low point, because you always want to try and turn so that you're working down the grain. As you can see, I've now got this channel. That means I can work from the outside of the rim back into the bowl, and we'll be going downhill as you're cutting into that. It's also a good opportunity for me just to level off the surface of this. Okay, so I've swapped over to a tip down hook tool, which is good for working down the core of the bowl, because we can rest the back of the hook on the core that we're making. As that gully gets deeper, the tool head is going to start to catch, so the way in which we overcome that is by turning the tool anti-clockwise very slightly, and that will just widen the gully that the tool head runs in, meaning that we can work that gully down deeper and deeper into the centre of the bowl. There is going to come a point though when that gets too deep to work with this particular tool, so when that happens we just come back out to the edge of the bowl and work on hollowing that out. Now as you can see, that's taken the whole level down, and we can go back under the core here. We make the gully, turn the tool anti-clockwise slightly. That increases the room for the tool to run in, and we can continue working that core down. So most of the time we've been working, the tool head has been, if we take 12 o'clock up here, 9 o'clock out here, we've been working the tool between 9 o'clock and 7 o'clock. But as you're working on the core, so that we don't end up hitting the rim of the bowl, the tool head starts coming down and more like between 5 o'clock and 6 o'clock, so you're working underneath the core. As you see there, the tool head's just getting trapped a bit, so I just need to open up the gully to give the tool a little bit more room. So as the tool head goes beneath the core, it becomes more and more difficult to actually see what's happening. So listening to the noises that you're getting from the lathe becomes far more important. So this is the kind of noise that you want to hear. And it's a different noise when there's no more room for the tool to actually cut, so I'll try and force that now. It's when you start hearing the tool making a noise on the bowl when you're releasing the treadle. At that point, you know you either need to come back out and start working down into the bowl to give yourself more room, or you need to increase the width of the gully that you're cutting into. One of the other tips I found, that as the tool head starts coming underneath the core, the coordination becomes a little bit more complicated in ensuring that the cutting edge engages with the work. So as you press down on the treadle, you press away from you very, very slightly with the tool handle, so that forces the head into contact with the bowl blank, and you can continue making the cut. A slightly more complex coordination at other points in the bowl. And at this point, you really can just go by sound. So I'm not actually looking at what I'm doing at the moment, I'm just reliant upon the sound of the cutting, and you can see the shavings are still coming out. So if you find yourself hunching over, that's a sure way to getting a stiff back and getting tired quite quickly. So if you keep your posture upright and open and listen to what's happening, rather than being solely reliant on what's happening by looking at the work. Okay, so what I want to do now, because we've worked in inch and a half or so into the bowl, what I don't want to do is work too far down on the core that it actually starts meaning that the bowl is less stable on the work. So we need to finish off the rim and working on getting the walls the correct size before there's any movement on the bowl, and I'll show you the type of movement we get as we progress with this work. So I can still use the tip down tool on this part of the bowl, just bringing the walls down to probably about between 2/8 and 3/8 of an inch, so between 3 and 5 millimeters. And I'm still being relatively aggressive with the tool there to remove the waste material quite quickly. When you want to start doing the finishing cuts, we need to be a little bit more precise and a little bit more control with the tool to make sure that you get a decent finish. So when I'm at this point, I actually prefer to swap over tools. So the tool I'm going to use for putting the rim on is this inside bevel hook tool. I'm going to use it as a tip up in this instance because you can roll that over the lip of the bowl and it leaves a nice finish. So as I've come over the edge of the bowl, I start moving the tool down from a kind of like 8 o'clock position down to 6 o'clock. That gives me access to the inside of the bowl without actually damaging the work we've just done. Okay, so I'm quite pleased with the way this top ½ inch or so of the bowl is going at the moment. The wall is close to the final width that we want, and we'll keep that consistent all the way down to the base of the bowl now. as previously mentioned, I work on this part of the bowl and getting a decent finish here before we get too far into the bowl, because there will be a point when the bowl starts moving on the core, and as soon as it starts moving on the core, when you're pushing in with the hook tool, it can actually start changing the thickness of the wall, so you get an inconsistent thickness from one side to the other of the bowl. So I'm just going to come back up to the top of this of the core here and start working a bevel down the core to give myself a little bit more room, hollowing out the wood. So as a note of caution here, if there's a couple of different mandrel types that you can use. There's this one, which is the tenon being pushed into jam fit into a mortise, or you can use the spiked mandrel. When you start doing this undercut, there's with the tenon mortise, there's a chance that you can cut into the void where you've drilled the hole, and if that happens, this centre piece of wood becomes quite weak and can snap off before you finish the bowl, which to all intents and purposes means you just have to start again with a different bowl. If you're using a spiked mandrel, as you start doing the undercut, if you get too close to where the spikes are going in, you can end up damaging your tools by having metal hit metal. So you just need to be a little bit careful on the angle that you take when you start working on this undercut running down the core. So, okay, let's see if I can work in just a t-shirt, whether it's too cold or not. So, I've hollowed this out again another inch or so, so I'm just going to come back up to this top piece here and start working that down so we can concentrate on getting a good finish on the wall. I've now hollowed out to about here on the inside of the bowl. The side wall is pretty consistent in width. I'm happy with the finish that we've got working on that. So now, as I work down, I'm going to have to change the angle of approach so that I'm following the curve of this on the inside of the bowl. It is possible at this point, if you don't realise that's where you are on the bowl, you can actually end up pushing a hole through this part when the wall gets too thin. When you're working on a bowl like this, it's always worthwhile just checking exactly where you are throughout the project. So I have these calipers, quite a simple device. So you can see we've got just over an inch in the base, and the sidewall is about 4/8 of an inch at the moment, maybe a little bit less than that, so that needs to come down a little bit more there. Looking at this bowl, it is slightly too thick in my opinion at the rim here, so I can just take some of that back before we work any further, because the bowl is still quite steady on the core. I also now have more of an idea of how far we need to go into the base. So just working on the rim again, I'm going to go back to Ben's tool and use it as a tip up, just to take a fraction off the inside here. Yeah. So that's now a more consistent width, as the rim was just slightly thicker than the inside wall. So now I continue back into the bowl, so I'm going to swap over tools. Back to this tip down tool so I can continue working down the core. So again, it's worthwhile just keeping an eye on the thickness of the bowl wall as you work down into the base. So that's now about 3/4 of an inch, and the core at the moment in the middle here is probably about 2 inches in diameter, maybe a little bit less. So it's going to be a fair amount of work to actually thin this core down before we take too much wood out from the bottom of the bowl and this becomes unsteady on the core. So we also don't want to go too deep into the bowl, because we want to keep a consistent thickness all the way down into the base of the bowl as well. So for this, because there's not a huge amount of room to get my tool underneath, I'm going to come back up to the top and take the shoulder off this core, just to give the tool the ability to reach down to the bottom of the tool there. Though I am being conscious that I don't interfere with the tenon, or if this had been a spiked mandrel, obviously I don't want to hit the spikes either. So what I've been able to do there is just take the shoulder off this core, which means that I can take a slightly different angle to get the tool head down to the base here, where I'm going to be thinning out the core, and it gives me a little bit more room so that this neck of the tool here isn't hitting the rim of the bowl. It's actually quite easy at this point that if you allow your tool to run on the rim, that you'll actually damage this part of the bowl, which from experience is quite frustrating. I've just been working down the core here, and it's now approaching a point where it's getting close to failing, and we don't want the bowl to actually fail whilst it's on the lathe. Some mandrel goes one way and the bowl goes the other, and after all the effort you don't want this to crack or get damaged on the floor. But what I'm actually doing is I work this core down to a point near failure, so I'm working this bevel into the base of the bowl. And what we want to do is ensure that the centre of the bowl is the lowest point in the bowl, because when you're using a bowl you want the spoon or your implements or whatever to move freely over the bottom, and you're only going to really have a good experience with the bowl if the centre is the lowest point. Just a quick check to see where we are on the base of the bowl, and that's about 1/2 inch at the moment, so I want to take that down just a little bit further. Right, so I'm pretty much happy now with the thickness of the base of that, and we can just see ever so slightly there's a bit of movement now with the bowl rocking on the core, so we need to take that down a little bit more before we take it off the lathe to break the core out. I've taken the core down so that we've got more movement on the bowl now. As you can see, the whole bowl is rocking on the core there, so I'd say that we've taken that enough now that we can take the bowl off the lathe. Right, so the grain is running in this direction, so when you want to break the core off, we've got the grain running horizontally now, and you hold the bowl firmly and it comes out like that. So what this is now left, we have this piece of wood in the middle that needs to be removed, and we've got this oily bit on the back here that needs to be taken out as well here. And with these we're going to remove those using a spoon knife, and we're just going to be a little bit careful that we don't get this oil onto the bowl because that's quite dirty and is going to leave a nasty mark, so we'll get rid of that bit first. So to remove the waste material from the inside and the outside of the bowl, I'm going to be using this spoon knife. It's another tool from Ben Orford, and this is razor sharp, and it's ideal for this part of the project. So I'm just going to be cutting across the grain, I just find this outside piece can be a little bit stubborn to start with, because this actually dries out quite quickly because you've had the friction on the metal centre. So as you're removing this waste material here, what you need to be careful of is that the spoon knife doesn't come in and hit the foot of the bowl, because it will leave small marks and ruin the finish. That's blended in quite nicely now, and when that dries that will be even less obvious. So we can now work on the inside. It's a slightly different grip with the knife this time, so I'm going to hold it more like this, because as I work it's a squeezing motion which moves the blade, and that's quite a small movement to keep it under control on the inside. So again, this doesn't slip beyond where the cut's happening and go into the side of the bowl causing damage. So again, we're going across the grain. We also don't want to put too much force on the edge of the bowl here, because on a larger bowl that would increase the amount of leverage and there's a chance it could actually crack the top of the bowl. So gently does it, slowly does it to get the best result. So there we go, one walnut greenwood bowl turn completed.